And all right, we're recording. Welcome, Jator, Piere, and thank you for coming on the Healing Mastery Summit. And just to introduce you, you've been in this game. First off, I'm not going to read the bio, but you've been in this game for a long time, 20 years now, right? So you've been dealing with things like emotional trauma, autoimmune diseases, digestive disorders, chronic stress, chronic pain, and that's what we're here. That's what this summit's about. It's about people who are suffering, who are dealing with issues, who are trying to heal, try to get better, and then transferring some of that information that you've gained along the way, that you've seen, because I know you've dealt with a lot of people along the way. You work for the Czech Institute, Kresser Institute, so a wealth of knowledge. And for the people listening here, really, this is a lot of information that can be transferred to you, and we're going to stick to the topic of, it'll probably go off on tangents, but emotional, never. Emotional trauma and just emotional issues and emotional exploration. So before we get into that, again, thank you for coming on the Healing Mastery Summit, and we're excited to have you here, and these are great topics for me and personally.
Yeah, for me personally as well. And it's an honor to be here. And for me, one perspective is always, whatever I share is always a reminder to me of things I need to also hear. So it's a beautiful place to be, to share my heart and my mind and share with myself.
It's so true. When I do these interviews, actually, I gain a lot just by doing the interviews, because I have these aha moments. So people listening here, you might have powerful aha moments. So let's start off with emotional exploration. What is that, and how do people go about doing it?
Yeah, oh man, it's a great shallow question.
General question.
No, it's super deep, actually, for me. So emotional exploration, I think, for me, what that means is, when we're growing up, a lot of us as children, we learn to get our needs met in very specific ways. We're very attentive to our outside world. And we start to notice different ways that we get attention, different ways that we get acknowledgement, different ways that we think that we matter.
Right.
And I think many of us might go immediately to a place of, well, yeah, looking at kind of like the positive aspects of that. We get acknowledged for, bringing home a good painting, or bringing home good grades, etc. And the interesting thing about that is that starts to build an emotional neediness that most of us have as human beings. And as far as I'm aware, I don't know anyone that doesn't have that emotional neediness.
Right.
So on one end, we start to look for outside attention through our good behavior. That's one way we get emotional attention. And then another end, we also get attention through, in quotes, negative behavior, when we come home with F's or we do something bad.
Right.
And as a general theme, many of us learn to get our emotional needs met through these behaviors, some of them being positive, some of them being negative.
Right.
And as we grow older, those patterns are kind of ingrained in us. And then as we're growing older, we start to recapitulate the same patterns in our adult lives. Mm-hmm. Part of the challenge is those familiar patterns that helped us survive in an environment when we were children don't help us as adults. They no longer serve us.
Right.
In fact, a lot of them can be very painful. Yeah. And so the emotional exploration, for me, why that's challenging as a theme, is many of us as children learn how to get our needs met, but we don't learn typically how to express our feelings.
Right.
And I don't think this is a gender issue. I think this happens with men and women. Mm-hmm. That men are celebrated for expressing a category of feelings.
Yeah.
Women typically are celebrated for expressing a category of feelings.
Yeah.
Not many human beings are accepted and celebrated for expressing the whole spectrum of feeling.
Yeah.
So the emotional exploration, why it's hard to get there, is because if we have those patterns from the past that have helped us survive, when we're adults and we start to think, I really want to change this,
Yeah.
that change also means that we have to open up the spectrum in which we're used to going into.
Right.
For most human beings, that is extremely scary to do because it's unfamiliar.
Yeah.
It's unpredictable. We don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
We don't know if we're still going to get our needs met. We don't know if we're still going to get attention.
Yeah.
Our whole lives could change dramatically, at least in here.
Yeah.
And in here.
Yeah.
And we're afraid of that.
Yeah.
So what most of us do as humans is then we just block it off.
Yep.
And we don't explore it, and we just kind of we bury it deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and these things just bury on top of each other.
And then the doctors give you medication.
Well said. I mean, when you consider that perspective, if even half of that's true,
right?
And you consider, okay, well, how many of us are lugging around a kettlebell that weighs 200 kilos of emotional unprocessed pain?
Baggage, yeah.
Is that going to tire you out?
Yeah.
Is that going to cause your body pain? Yeah. Is that going to disrupt your gut-brain axis? Yeah. Is that going to disrupt your perception of reality? Yes. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Is that going to disrupt your respiratory mechanics?
Yeah.
Yes. Is that going to affect your mitochondria and methylation? All that? Yes.
Right. It affects on a cellular level, you're affecting the entire body, right?
On a cellular level, yeah.
This is an awesome topic because I mean, I'm sure everybody's challenged with this, but I had depression growing up. And part of the depression was that I didn't express myself and I bottled everything up all inside. And of course, it didn't come out and it just turned into depression. And so I identify with exactly what you're saying. And then I was put on medication at a young age because of that. And now I'm free of that because of what you're talking about. And so I've done some exploration emotionally. So if someone is in pain or they have bottled things up, like what are some of the first steps that they can take to start to release this and let go, like at least cut the weight of that kettlebell in half, or just get rid of some of it?
Yeah, I love that question. I think for me, one of the first steps, and this might sound really cliche, but it's so important. And I think it's often said, but the depth that's held within it isn't often explored. Is the first step might be for us to realize that we are carrying around that kettlebell.
Yeah.
The first step might be to start to accept the awareness that we have unprocessed baggage. And if we can do that from the perspective of, okay, let me feel into that, let me consider it, let me explore it, and not turn it into another place where you criticize, shame, attack, and fear yourself.
Yeah, that's negative self-talk.
Right, because that's part of the challenge is these things hide deeply.
Yeah.
So if we want to bring our awareness to it, the paradox is they'll hide even deeper if you beat yourself up about having it.
Yeah.
And many of us in Western culture especially have negative association with therapy, coaching, mental and emotional exploration because it's scary, one. Two, from a Western perspective as a general theme, it's criticized as something must be wrong with you. what is going on? You have feelings other than joy and excitement. You shouldn't have these other feelings. And even the framework, the awareness of the framework of negative emotion. We have to ask the question, at least from my perspective, is, well, where did we learn to frame these things as positive or negative? Mm-hmm. That peels back into our value sets from our family of origin and our culture that tells us what a negative emotion or what a positive emotion is. Right. Which interestingly influences our experience of that emotion at a physiological level. Right? There's all this science. I know you're smart as a whip, and there's all this science out there around how negative emotion is bad for us. Right. What if it's not the negative emotion? What if it's our association with what the negative emotion represents to us? Yeah. Not the emotion itself. Yeah. And for me, that's a powerful place to start to become aware of. Is it okay? Can anger be my friend? Yeah. Can rage be my friend? Can depression be my friend? Can anxiety be my friend? Can fear be my friend? You and I jumping on here, every time I do a summit or a podcast or an interview, there's a part of me that feels a sense of fear. Yeah. Am I going to do it right? Are they going to like me? Am I going to say the right things? Am I going to F up? All of that, right? Instead of beating myself up about that, I celebrate it. And I celebrate my fear and the part of me that feels afraid. And I let that part of me know that 42-year-old Jator is here to protect you. I got your back. I'm not going to let anything happen to you, and we can do this together. Yeah. That then changes my association with what fear represents to me. Right. And then it doesn't have this detrimental impact on my physiology. It has an acceptive impact on my physiology. Yeah. And then I'm okay the way I am, Ian. Yeah.
Letting go of judgment.
Yeah.
So like a good example would be just like maybe somebody who grew up in a religion that is fear and guilt based, right? They're going to have a different perception on like something sexual or something, like, as opposed to somebody who didn't grow up like that. Like they might associate guilt with doing something that another person has no problem and feels no shame or guilt doing. Is that like something that you're explaining now?
Oh. Okay. I love taking my crazy words all over the place and saying it in a sentence or two. Yes. that's well said. It's, in our family of origin and in our culture, we're inundated with perspective. And so you brought up religion. And if you're inundated, and I'm not saying religion's good or bad, I'm not attacking that. I'm just saying if you're inundated with that perspective, you're going to feel guilt and shame about different things than someone who was brought up without that perspective. And it's not really about religion. It could be culture. Whatever, it could be religion. Yeah. I'll give you a very easy example. I like to eat with my hands. Right. And that's something I've taught myself, and I've moved out of my family values around, right? My mom's from Burma and then to England, but the English are very proper. Thank you. So for me, eating with my hands is a joyous, non-shameful, beautiful occasion. Yeah. When I hang out with a lot of other people, they feel a sense of shame and fear about me eating with my hands, and then have to criticize me for my behavior because their value set and their perspective is that's wrong. Right. And this is where, for me, it gets beautiful. The beauty is, well, what if we start to dialogue with each other about that stuff? And instead of going directly into judgment and criticism, which I do too, what if we said, okay, I have some judgment and I have some criticism. Whoa, I'm curious about that. Yeah. And then ask me a question. Well, what does it mean to you to eat with your hands? And I can go into that. What does it mean to you to eat with your knife and fork? And then we can explore it together, and not to make one wrong or right, but to be okay that we're different.
Yeah.
And that's relieving in and of itself.
And I think what you're talking about, which is a source of a lot of pain and discomfort for everybody, is expectations of other people, right? So like if I'm sitting down with you and I'm like, well, I expect you to eat with a fork and knife. Why are you not eating with a fork and knife? It's like, that's on me, right? I'm feeling bad about something that I expect you to do, which isn't really who I am. And if I have those expectations, I'm not going to feel good about myself, or I'm going to have a hard time in life.
Yeah, I'd say probably a little bit of both. In your expectations too, then you'll have these expectations based on your value set, right?
Yeah.
And then you'll have your emotional charge about that.
Right.
What he's doing is wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you'll need to either hide that from me, or you'll need to overtly share that with me.
Right.
And most people aren't really well versed in communication. Yes. Most people don't know how to say, yo, Jator, I'm super interested why you eat with your hands. I notice that I'm getting triggered and charged about it. And I'm curious about that. That feeling is mine to own. I'd love to hear why you eat with your hands, because it's quite frankly pissing me off.
Right.
I mean, if you could have a dialogue like that, it's a game changer, rather than what would typically happen is, why are you eating with your hands? You can't eat with your hands at the table. That's disgusting. And you go into shame and blame. Right. And when we're talking about emotional exploration and an awareness, how much pain do we each feel by, one, shaming and blaming others,
right,
and two, on the flip side of that, receiving that shame and blame? Mm-hmm. Because back to something that we were talking about earlier, not many of us know that we're not responsible for how other people feel.
Right.
So then we take responsibility, then we start to beat ourselves up, then we have to defend and prove, and then we get into these arguments. I mean, it's
insanity.
It's painful and it's insanity. Right. Or like you said earlier, we just swallow it.
Yeah. I did that for years, and then it manifested itself in abuse of, alcohol, like, which a lot of people do, or drugs, or some other thing. And it's a powerful thing to get a grip of. And I find that, in your experience, how many people would you say are actually doing the work to clear the emotional trauma? Like, people that are listening to this who are wanting healing may not think that emotional work is necessary. They may be looking for supplements or some trick or something like that. So do you see that most people are doing this on their own, or do they need a coach, or they need somebody to help them out?
In my perspective, and I'm biased, I'd say, okay, so this is what I do for a living, right? So I have lots of clients, and I run courses, blah, blah, blah. So from that perspective, I have a biased perspective of, oh yeah, a lot of people.
Right.
But when I get out there and share this, whether it's here or on other platforms, the amount of attention that this type of stuff gets compared to if I was going to talk about Quicksilver Scientific and detoxing, that would get 90% more attention than this. And that, for me, speaks volumes to our fear of ourselves, and our fear of our vulnerability, and our fear of intimacy. To do this work, in my experience, it takes a lot of vulnerability and intimacy to want to get to know yourself. And in a society where we're not celebrated for who we be, we're celebrated for what we do and what we get done and how much we produce and how many signs and symbols we have after our name. well, I don't need to look into that. And the real story is, which not many people are going to say, I'm afraid to look into that. I'm afraid at what I'm going to find.
Right.
I'm afraid that I'm going to find that a part of me actually benefits greatly from the pain that I keep myself in. And that's why I can't find my way out.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So a lot of people are sitting here, or they're in denial maybe of the fact that they have a lot of pain and they don't want to face it. So they cut that part of their mind or psyche off. And it's a survival mechanism, but it's also doesn't serve us, especially today. Would you say that is correct? Like maybe when you had to literally survive and you didn't have food, shelter, water, it served you, but nowadays we don't have those issues. So dealing with this trauma would help. What happens when someone deals with this trauma? Like if they actually face it, what happens to their life?
Yeah. So I think you said a lot of really cool things that I want to tap on. From the survival perspective, I think for me, nail on the head. When we look at our ancestors and we think about our kind of negative biases, that would help us survive. If we were in the wild, we would need to look for things that were off to help us survive what was coming. So we have this kind of biases to look for things that aren't right.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it's almost, I would say it's at our DNA level. Mm-hmm. We're in that survival space.
Yeah.
And now as a culture, for most of us, we're not in that space anymore, at least technically. Not for most of us. There's still some of us that are in that space. And we're still now in that survival space because of the way that we treat ourselves, because of the way that we perceive our realities, because of work stress, financial stress, mental and emotional stress.
Not enough social media likes.
Yeah, not enough social media likes. And interesting, there's also portions of society that are still literally in survival mode. And I mean, low income, very hard neighborhoods. When a lot of people criticize what's going on in those neighborhoods, I don't see it as, I don't think we should be criticizing it. We should be looking at the perspective of, it makes sense.
Yeah. What would you be doing if you were?
What would you be doing if your next meal wasn't guaranteed? Your housing wasn't guaranteed. You weren't sleeping well. You weren't getting really good food. You were under a lot of stress. You would be in survival, and your level of reactivity would be very high because it has to be, because you're in an unsafe environment.
Always on alert.
Always on alert. So as even some of us that have the opportunity and the money and the time to do that type of self-exploration, we're also in part in that environment based on how we're treating ourselves. That stressor isn't, whether we're living in a very hard neighborhood or we're sleeping like crap and eating like crap and living in a beautiful house, our body doesn't interpret that allostatic load as different. It interprets it as the same. We have to deal with it and navigate it and somehow maintain allostasis. So the benefit, at least from my perspective, around doing emotional exploration is that if we simply look at it from how much stress we carry around, how much of that kettlebell, back to that kettlebell we carry around, and the words that you use, if we cut that in half, then that's a lot less physiological load being diverted to deal with unprocessed suffering, trauma, pain, etc. That energy now can be diverted to healing, detoxification, gut health, brain health, body posture. That energy now is not being diverted and siphoned into all these different directions. It's now being we can take that and now siphon it toward other things that we need, in the same sense as if you and I were hanging out today and I said, Ian, I want you to carry around all day long 240 kg kettlebells all day. I mean, how fast would you tire out? I would tire out pretty fast because that's a symbol for all of that energy is being diverted now to you holding these 2 kettlebells. So would you want to do a summit holding 2 kettlebells? Would you want to do work holding 2 kettlebells? Would you want to have conversation? Would you want to do anything other than use all of your energy to hold those kettlebells because you got no energy to do anything else?
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
So if we start to put one of those down, then all that energy gets to be used in different places.
Yeah. And it's a good analogy when people say like, oh, get rid of the baggage. I mean, that really is what you're doing, and you become lighter. And this is the power of this is, you spoke about DNA, is on an epigenetic level, right? So if the genetics are being expressed through environment, if your environment is toxic, whether it's toxic emotion, you're going to express disease type scenarios or symptoms, as opposed to getting rid of that emotional baggage, which clears up and cleans up the emotional stress on the body, right? So therefore people will not only start to heal, but the disease manifests itself in a different environment, right? So you start to see these diseases clearing up. Is that what you see with your clients when you work with someone who starts to clear emotionally?
For sure. I love what you were just tapping on. I love that stuff. There's a word that many people aren't familiar with, and I'm guessing you are, is exposome, and that is our total environment.
Okay. Yeah.
That word represents from the moment of conception to this moment in our lives, all non-genetic influences, which is
like
the environment. The sun, everything. So exposome. And that's all non-genetic influences. And what you were talking about is epigenetics, as you said. And what's often not spoken about, at least in my mind, around epigenetic expression is it's the environment. True. It is. It's also the internal environment. Because our internal environment is typically a reflection of our external environment. How we feel internally about ourselves, how we get our needs met, what we think we deserve, what we think we don't deserve, how we get love, how we get attention. All of those things are internal. And those internal ideas then create the choices and how we live and treat ourselves, which create our external. So then you start to look at the underlying influence, like you were saying, around epigenetics and underlying expression of that. And are those genes turning on and off at all these different areas? I had a client, which this still blows my mind. I can't even believe this is true. Who has MS and had really bad symptoms. And she had done Terry Wall's protocol, and that worked and helped a lot. And then she started to use a lot of work from Chris Kresser, and that helped even more. But still had a lot of symptoms, even though she was 90% better, but still a lot of pain. We literally did 2 emotional sessions, and her pain has been gone ever since. Now, I'm not saying that's me. What I'm saying is that person was open enough to crack open their heart and start to open up that baggage, realize the kettlebell they were carrying, and ask the question, does carrying this kettlebell still serve me? And if it does, why? Right? What benefits do I get from being sick? Most people don't ask that question. And what challenges come with being sick? It's easy to look at the challenge of MS or autoimmune disease or thyroid issues or back pain. And it's easy to say, well, I don't want this.
Right.
It's really hard to take responsibility and say,
maybe I created it.
Maybe I created it. And as a quick example on that, I had a consult about 4 or 5 years ago with a woman who was in tremendous pain.
Yeah.
Blown discs, thyroid stuff, gut stuff, surgeries, etc. Had seen all kinds of practitioners, all kinds of integrative docs, all kinds of docs. And in our consult, she was saying she only wanted to do the physical with me. And I said, well, all right, can I ask you one question before the consult was over?
Yeah.
I said, would you be willing to consider how you benefit from all your pain? She said, that's a really weird question. I said, well, I'm a weird guy. She said, okay. So she calls me back and leaves me a message about 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
We don't end up working together. She calls me back, leaves me a message 3 weeks later and says, Jator, that was a really strange question that you asked me, and I sat with it and it brought up a lot.
Yeah.
And I realized that at work, I get special parking. I get a leave at 12 noon every day. I don't have to work a full day. My husband does all the cooking. He does all the shopping. My husband takes care of me. And I also get a lot of people coming around to take care of me all the time.
Right.
And in that moment, she said, I'm not ready to give that up.
Mm-hmm.
That's powerful.
Yep.
Even though, go ahead.
Anybody listening to this could use that question for themselves to just explore the emotional part of why they are where they are.
And that, I love that. And that is a punch in the face, which is why most people don't want to even want to consider it. Most people will hear that question who aren't coaching with me and say, he's crazy. That is absolute BS. There's no way that I want this. And I'd say, okay, just consider it.
I can say from my personal experience in having health challenges, when I explore and look back, I know the thoughts. I can literally string the thoughts that caused the reaction of what I had. And so I know it's true for me. Like, I know that I am responsible. Although there was other factors like, not knowing that some medication was poison, but I still am responsible. And we were talking about the pain, like, or can anger be my friend? The depression was one of the best things that happened to me. So, you can find the light that comes from the darkness, right? And so maybe people listening to this that are in need of healing, they can use that question. Is there any other powerful questions that might release the darkness or expose more of the light?
Yeah, there are. And caveat to asking these questions. Because so many of us are used to shaming and blaming and criticizing the outside world.
Yeah, I love doing that.
So do I. When we start to ask these questions and find these type of answers, we might start to then turn that inwardly. The purpose here isn't to then shame, blame, and criticize yourself.
Right.
The purpose here is to become aware and start to offer yourself compassion, empathy, and understanding for why you do what you do. And that's a super important twist. So other questions, how do I benefit from this is probably for me the most powerful one, especially around pain and disease, etc. What part of me benefits from this?
Yeah.
What emotional needs are being met? Where did I learn this behavior? Where did I learn to get attention this way?
Yeah.
How old was I?
Right.
When I'm feeling sick, overwhelmed, and angry about it, how old do I feel?
That's a powerful one.
Another powerful one. For me, another powerful one is it possible that I'm emulating one or both of my parents? Is this a pattern that I learned from watching them? I have lots of clients that take on their parents' patterns to get acknowledgement and to fit in with their parents. Back to this idea of epigenetics.
Yeah.
You know, let's just say you have a family that everyone's obese in the family.
Yeah.
And we have physiological reasons, we have epigenetic reasons, we have genetic reasons, all of that. We have emotional reasons too.
Right.
What's interesting about being a part of a family in that sense is many of us will feel a sense of shame and or fear if we get lean and we're no longer a part of the family and how the family moves through life.
Right.
All of a sudden we're different.
Yep.
That can be enough to facilitate old pathways to get us back to being fat again, because we're afraid of the judgment and criticism from our family that is different from us.
Yeah. Oh, you're eating healthy? You're eating gluten-free? What do you do?
Yeah. Who are you to get better? Who are you to feel good? Who are you to get lean? Who are you to not be part of the family? I mean, these are powerful places that people typically don't look. And it's not just family of origin. Then it's also thinking about intimate relationships and partnerships.
Yeah.
How many of us are doing a lot of our behaviors because we want to fit in with our partner at the cost of being who we really experience ourselves to be? Yeah. I have, I play hockey, and if almost every guy that I know in there comes often to practice and says, I can only come play one time this week because, my wife gets so pissed off and, she's just angry at me if I play more than that. And I'm not making this about the wife. What I am saying is, what they're really saying is, I am a little boy and I haven't learned to represent myself. Mm-hmm. And I don't have a wife, I have a mother.
Right.
And that flip-flops.
Yeah.
So when we start to look at that too, I mean, this starts to get...
you turn your wife into your mom, and then what happens?
Right? And then what happens? Yeah. So, or you start to turn your husband into your son, or your husband into your father.
Yes. And these are the dynamics that are being played out predominantly, right? I mean...
I would say, again, I'm biased, but I mean... these things are programmed into us because this is how most people function in life. Yeah. So these are our models. And, what school did you ever go to where they modeled how to communicate? Where they modeled how to notice your self-talk? Where they modeled compassionate communication? Where they modeled what healthy functional relationships might look like? Nowhere. I can't think of one.
Yes, I've never heard any of that until I started.
Either have I.
Yeah.
I know there's other cool schools like Steiner and etc.
Right.
But those things aren't deeply modeled there either.
Right.
And this is our awareness of communication with the outside world is a direct and literal mirror for how you talk to yourself internally.
Totally.
If you are overt or subtle and attacking and blaming and shaming and critical and angry and hateful and all those things outwardly, I don't make many guarantees. I guarantee you are doing that to a part of yourself inside of you. And that is disease.
Yes. That's some powerful stuff. Really powerful. Now, I want to speak a little bit about trauma, which is kind of related to this. Because, I mean, you have physical trauma and then emotional trauma. So we're talking about the emotional side of things. And I was speaking with a client, and she had some trauma when she was young, and that trauma was triggered. And as soon as that trauma got triggered, all of her health issues just went crazy. And it was one point, her mom called her on the phone and told her about somebody who passed away that had done harm to her. And just that talking about it was boom, it brought her back. And then the health issues just went crazy. So how is trauma affecting people? Like, if something happened to you when you're younger and you don't address it, is that the same thing we're talking about before, or are we talking about something different?
Yeah, I would say it's the same thing that we're talking about with your client.
Yeah.
So what I heard in essence is that this client had been numbing out this pain for a very long time. This is one reason why people don't want to do exploration,
right?
Because we numb things deeply out.
Yeah.
And that's that burying process.
Yeah.
So let's just say she numbed it out to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So it's playing in the background and it's having some effect on her physiology in the background, right? You work with bodies too, like a trigger point, right?
Right.
So trigger points, typically people don't feel.
Right.
But if you foam roll it or you get a massage, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
Now, trigger points, typically you don't feel until the pressure arises or you push on them, like what happened to her, the exposure.
Right.
And as you know, even though you don't feel the trigger point without the pressure being applied to it, it does disrupt the cells and the fluid in that area. And it also disrupts muscular activation and expression.
Mm-hmm.
So it's having low level effect. We just don't know it's there. It's the same thing with emotional trauma.
Yeah.
These are our trigger points that are hidden underneath the surface.
Yeah.
And why most people don't like to do this work is because when the foam roll of life comes,
yeah.
your client had the foam roll of life, roll on a big trigger point.
Yeah.
And what happens when we roll on trigger points? It releases a lot of the metabolic waste that's been housed there for a very long time.
And that's why it's important to do the work.
Yes.
So you don't end up worse.
And it's, back to the physiological or the metaphor around this.
Yeah.
How many people like to foam roll? not a whole lot.
Yeah.
Because it's painful, even though it feels fantastic afterwards.
Yeah.
So, with your client numbing this out, let's just say that she didn't ever get that spark that, brought the awareness to this big, trigger point that she has.
Yeah.
Let's say it never gets sparked like that. Well, it would be affecting her at a very low level for a long time and eventually would cause some kind of challenge.
Yeah.
The hard beauty to see is that by her getting that pop, she can't hide from it anymore.
Yeah.
Now she has to process it.
Yeah. Or when people go on medication, right?
Right. Or I was assuming she processed it because she's working with you. So, or drink or drugs or over meditate or whatever you got to do to run away from your feeling.
Yeah.
Netflix, work,
yeah.
Relationship, whatever you got to do.
Right.
And that it's called, I'm not a big fan of laws, so I hate saying law, but it's called a law, but it's called Herring's Law.
Okay.
And he's a homeopathic, he was one of the fathers of homeopathic medicine.
Okay.
And his law is that the same path that caused the trauma or the pain will have to be reversed as you heal it.
Mm.
And like that's what happened.
Like a Herx reaction.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You have to go through that. And it's not fun. It's not, I don't particularly find it great fun to go in and talk with my coach and bawl my eyeballs out and get angry and feel pain and get upset and heave and throw up. It's not fun, but it's purposeful.
Right. And look at what you're doing now. So now you're spreading the message, spreading the wealth of the emotion.
Yeah.
So we're getting to the bottom of the hour here. What would you say, besides those questions, is there anything else that you would recommend that is powerful kind of healing hacks, if there is ever such a hack? It's like, what is something that somebody can do right now that they can get value from, that they can see an impact?
I love that question. I love grounding this into some practicality. First thing that popped in is there's no wrong or right way to do this. First thing. And second is, if you like to journal or you like to record or you like to sing, create a place where you freely express yourself. A journal or voice record. And it doesn't need to be with anyone else. Let yourself express whatever you want. Your deepest, darkest secrets. The anger that you've never given voice to. The shame that you've never given voice to. The people that you still hold on to anger and hurt about. Let yourself express that. If you have a very trusted friend, let yourself express it to your friend with a caveat. The caveat is ask the friend to only listen. The friend's there not to offer advice. The friend's there not there to fix it. The friend's there is not to change it. The friend is there to simply be someone to hold space with you as you get vulnerable with yourself.
Right.
One of the most powerful things, another practical thing that's very, very powerful, I think it might be one of my top 3 most powerful things any of us can do, is to share a secret that you keep, to share one of your most painful, shameful, disgusting thing that you've ever done in your life, to share it with somebody that you trust. Secrets, I'm not saying they're bad or good, but secrets create a tremendous amount of pain and shame internally. And if you can allow, it doesn't mean you need to go tell the person or any of that. It just, if you can share it with a person that you trust, it helps you learn to accept yourself, because you'll be in an environment with a person that's willing to hear your deepest, darkest SHIT and not turn their back on you. That is exquisitely powerful.
Freeing, very freeing. Awesome. That's one of the best things that I've ever done in my life. And I didn't know, because you're talking about, like, if you're holding on to resentments and you let them go, that baggage now is just released.
Hell yeah.
Something about expressing it to another human being, that connection and that release just is mind-blowing and changing, life-changing. So cool. Is there any last things before we end here that you want to tell the audience? And then we'll share how they can get in touch with you and get in contact with you.
Yeah, I'd like to share one last piece on that secret. Because I've had this come up in me too, and it's been very powerful for me, and it will continue to be so. But one time I was in this very interesting space, and I was imagining myself if I was in a room with God, and let's just not religious God, because it's source, great spirit, God, Jehovah, whatever, universe, higher self. But I was in a room with that, and I thought about being in a room with an entity or something that could know everything about me and hear all of my internal criticism and shame and blame and all of my stuff that I think is disgusting about Jator.
Right.
And for that entity or God to not turn its back on me is very interesting to put yourself in that perspective, because what immediately came up for me was I had to turn away. And that turning away for me represents that I still hold a lot of self-criticism about my actions. And I haven't learned yet, and this is why it's so powerful to do this with another human being. I haven't learned yet to offer myself the same acceptance that my best friends offer me.
That's super powerful. I'm my own worst critic.
Me too, brother.
So it's like, of course, I'm going to be critical of other things too.
Me too.
Part of my dis-ease that I have to let go of. So,
And
like us, do some of this work.
And part of our attachment to feeling comfortable in the discomfort of our shame and fear. And that's why I had to turn away, because I still need it.
Yeah. And holding a place, right, where when that discomfort's there, instead of social media or picking up the phone, just sitting with it.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Is that
Yep.
something?
Hell yeah. I mean, there's an adage, time heals.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's false. I think time numbs.
Yeah.
Feeling heals.
Yeah.
Being with your feelings, that's healing. Crying heals.
Yeah. Releasing the poison.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, this has been a pleasure and lots of powerful stuff. So if you'd like to learn more about Jator, you can find him on Instagram at Explore with Jator on Instagram. Is there anywhere else that they can get in contact with you?
My website is wehlc.com, wehlc.com. I'm also on Facebook as Jator Piere, and I have a YouTube channel, which is also Explore with Jator.
And I do know how powerful his work is because my sister has gotten coaching from him, and actually my nephew as well. So you've almost coached my whole family, and awesome.
And your parents.
That's right. Yeah, I forgot about that. So yeah, I'm interviewing somebody that has a massive impact on my family's lives. So if you're looking to heal, then you may want to consider reaching out. All right, Jator, it's been awesome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, brother. I appreciate it.
All right, have a great day.